The Tarot and the Universe. The Tarot is a pictorial representation of the forces of nature as conceived by the ancients according to a conventional symbolism. The sun is a star. Around him revolve a number of bodies called planets, including the moon, a satellite of the earth. These bodies revolve in one direction only, the solar system, not a sphere, but a wheel. The planets do not remain in exact, but swing to a certain comparatively small extent from one side of the true plane to the other. Their orbits are elliptical. The ancients imagined this wheel very much more clearly than modern minds are wont to do. They paid particular attention to the imaginary rim. Within the limits of this rim, they conceived that the fixed stars beyond were in a special way connected with the apparent motion of the sun. This rim, or belt of the wheel, they called the zodiac. The constellations outside this belt did not seem to them to matter so much to mankind, because they were not in the direct line of the great whirling force of the wheel. Tarot, T-A-R-O, R-O-T-A, rota equals wheel. Okay. There's also a note here, and that's referring to something I read in the last part, but it says CAL 334. The reference is to Ma'at, Themis, Lady of Balance. Maybe they're talking about the Justice card, something like that, but I'm not sure where this note came from. Oh, that's okay. If you were wondering what the note was from the last video, that was it. On to theories of the ancients. In old times, it was supposed that the earth was the center of the universe. The heavens being above the earth, they did not realize them as being equally below it. They were counted as of the divine nature, and as they recognized imperfections and irregularity in mundane affairs, they thought that the movements of the heavenly bodies, which they observed to be regular, must be perfect. Then they started some a priori thinking. I think that's how you say it. I mean, that's obviously a typo. I'm not sure what that means. Their mathematicians had the idea that a circle was a perfect figure. Therefore, they said, with characteristic theological reasoning, all heavenly bodies must move in circles. This religious assumption caused great trouble to the astronomers. As their measurements became more extended and accurate, they found it increasingly difficult to reconcile observation with theory, at least to do so without putting themselves to vast inconvenience in their calculations. So they invented cycles and epicycles to explain the observed movements. Ultimately, Copernicus was goaded by this annoyance to suggest that it would really be much more convenient, if only the idea were not so wicked, to imagine that the sun, and not the earth, was the center of the system. I think Dennis Eggleston might like to hear this part. I'm going to let him know. In mathematics, there are no fixed facts. Bertrand Russell says that in this subject, nobody knows what he is talking about, and it matters to nobody whether he is right or wrong. For example, begin with the assumption that the moon is the immovable center of the universe. So this is something that I've actually heard one of my favorite, most interesting astronomers on YouTube talk about. His name is Dennis Eggleston, and he talks about how we would interpret astrology if, say, we weren't doing a geocentric system like we typically do in astrology, but say we shifted it to a heliocentric system, which would put the Earth into the system as one of the heavenly bodies, as one of the planets. Right now in our geocentric system, the sun obviously is included. Like Crowley suggests here, if we have the assumption that the moon was the center, then the moon would be taken out of the chart, and the Earth would be put into the chart, essentially. Okay. The moon is the immovable center of the universe. Nobody can contradict it. One simply switches the calculations over to suit. The practical objection to this is that it would not facilitate the work of navigators. It is important to have this idea in one's mind, because otherwise one fails to grasp the whole spirit of modern science philosophy. It does not aim at truth. It does not conceive of truth, in any ordinary sense of the word, as possible. It aims at maximum convenience. They did not understand that the circle is only one case of the ellipse, that in which the foci coincide. To return to the picture of the solar system, the sun is the hub of the wheel. The outermost planet is on its rim and beyond, but laterally within that rim there are 12 constellations of the zodiac. Why 12? The first rough division of the circle is into 4, according to the observed seasons, and this rule of 4 that he pointed out earlier, which applies to the elements and the suits of the tarot and the worlds of Kabbalah. So the circle, I'm probably getting ahead of myself. According to the observed seasons, this choice may also have been influenced by the division of the elements into 4: fire, air, water, earth. These do not mean the objects now understood by these words as explained above. Perhaps because they thought it necessary to introduce so sacred a number as 3 into everything heavenly, or else because the observed constellations happened to be naturally divided into 12 groups. They divided the zodiac into 12 signs, 3 to each season. The influence of the sun upon the earth was observed to change as he passed through the signs. So did quite simple things like the measure of time between sunrise and sunset. When one says that the sun enters the sign of Aries, one means that if a straight line were drawn from the earth to the sun and prolonged into the stars or to the stars, that line would pass through the beginning of that constellation. Suppose, for instance, that one observed the full moon on the first day of spring. One will be able to see behind her the stars of the beginning of Libra, the sign opposite to Aries. It was observed that the moon took approximately 28 days to pass from full to full, and each day was assigned what was called a mansion. Her mysterious influence was supposed to change in each mansion. This theory does not enter directly into the tarot, but it must be mentioned to help clear up a certain confusion which is about to complicate the question. Here we go. 3. Early astronomers calculated that the sun took 360 days to go round the zodiac. This was a closely guarded secret of the learned. So they concealed it in the divine name Mithras, which adds up, according to the Greek convention, M40, I10, the TH is 9, R equals 100, A is 1, and S equals 200, all together to 360. The days to go around the zodiac. Better observation showed 365 days to be more accurate, so they decided to call it Abraxas, which those letters in a Greek numerology that equals 365. When the others found this out, they put themselves right by altering the spelling of Mithras to Maithras, which adds, like Abraxas, to 365. In this, there is still an error of not quite 6 hours, so that, in the course of centuries, the calendar kept slipping. It did not assume its present form until the time of Pope Gregory, where we got the Gregorian calendar. The point of all this, that they divided the circle of the zodiac into 360 degrees, is that this is a convenient basis for calculation. Each angular measure of 10 degrees was called a decanate, or decanate, yeah. Of these, there are thus 36, dividing each sign of the zodiac into 3 sections. It was supposed that the influence of the sign was very swift and fierce in the first decan. However, I don't know why I'm misreading words. In the first decan, powerful and balanced in the second, spiritualized and deciduous in the third. Let's see, what does that mean? Deciduous, like a tree, yeah, but informally denoting the milk teeth of a mammal, which are shedding its leaves. So something that is temporal, as opposed to permanent. It's a strange adjective to use. Okay, get out of here. Where were we? So, it's supposed that the influence of the sign is very swift and fierce in the first decan, powerful and balanced in the second, spiritualized and deciduous in the third. So fading, like in autumnal, um, August. I don't know if that's like the proper. I don't know. Shut up. Okay. A short digression. One of the most important doctrines of the ancients was that of the macrocosm and the microcosm. Man in himself, a little universe. He is a minute copy of the big universe. This argument was, of course, worked backwards, so the characteristics above given of the qualities of the 3 decans in the sign were probably due to an analogy with the course of a man's life. 4. The above remarks constitute a fairly complete idea of the arbitrary or mostly arbitrary presentation of the cosmos by the ancients. First of all, the division into 4 elements. These elements pervade everything. They would argue something like this about the sun. They would say that he was principally fire for obvious reasons, but he would have also in him the airy quality of mobility, the watery part that would be shown by his power to create images, and the earthy part, his immense stability. Yeah, as we mentioned before, this belief that everything has qualities of the 4 elements. The 4 elements make up everything, even things that seem purely like a single element in the material world. Like I mentioned fire, I think in the last video, how fire has airy parts and watery parts. Similarly, of a serpent, right, they would call his power of death fiery, his swiftness airy, his undulatory motion watery, and his habit of life earthy. These descriptions are obviously quite inadequate. They have to be filled up by attributing planetary qualities and zodiacal qualities to all objects. Thus, the bull in the zodiac is an earthy sign, and this is the central sign of the 3 through which the sun passes during spring. But the bovine nature is also gentle. Wherefore they said that Venus rules the sign of Taurus. The cow, moreover, is the principal milk-giving animal, so they made her the great mother goddess, thus identifying her with the moon, the mother of heaven, as the sun is the father. They represented this idea by saying that the moon is exalted in Taurus, that is, that she exerts the most beneficent aspect of her influence when she is in that sign. So, he's basically explaining why all these connections were made in ancient times to the sign of Taurus, which is mostly in the month of May, in the spring. Sorry. So the bull in the zodiac is an earth sign, as they mentioned, because that makes perfect sense, that it being a bull. But the gentle nature of it attributes Venus as its ruler. The moon is exalted in the sign, so Also, the horns of the bull are reminiscent of the moon, the crescent moon. And to be exalted means that the planet is exerting their most, and I'm quoting Crowley here, beneficent aspect of their influence when they're in a sign. 5. It is confusing at first, but most instructive and illuminating when the principle is thoroughly assimilated to note how all these elements subdivide and coalesce. One can only reach the comprehension of any one of these symbols by making a composite picture of it, one composed of all the others in varying proportion. Thus, each of the planets gives a certain portion of its influence to any object. This habit of thought leads to an understanding of the unity of nature, with its proper and spiritual exaltation, which could hardly be attained in any other way. It produces an internal harmony, which ends in an acceptance of life and of nature. It is now almost time to analyze and define the traditional characteristics of these symbols, but perhaps it would be better, first of all, to build on a sure foundation by considering of the number 2, which hitherto has not been taken into account. There are only 2 operations possible in the universe: analysis and synthesis. To divide and to unite. Salve a coagula, said the alchemists. If anything is to be changed, either one must divide one object into 2 parts or add another unit to it. This principle lies at the basis of all scientific thought and work. The first thought of the man of science is classification, measurement. He says, this oak leaf is like that oak leaf. This oak leaf is unlike this beech leaf. Until one has grasped this fact, one has not begun to understand scientific method. The ancients were fully cognizant of this idea. The Chinese, in particular, based their whole philosophy on this primary division of the original nothing. One must begin with nothing. Otherwise, the question would arise, whence came this postulated something? So they wrote the equation 0 equals +1 plus -1. +1 they called the yang, or male principle. -1 the yin, or female principle. These then combine in varying proportion, giving the idea of heaven and earth in perfect balance, the sun and the moon in imperfect balance, and the 4 elements in unbalanced form. See the diagram of the Chinese cosmos. If only I knew where that was. Let's see if I can find that. Oh, it's getting a little dry. Okay, is that the Chinese cosmos? No, that's our zodiac. Central dignitaries. That's important stuff. These triplicities, I love this stuff. This is important stuff. Glad that's included, but that's not what we're looking for. And again, definitely going to talk about some of these charts, though, like the triple trinity of the planets. That's important. Something to go through. And this chart, very important to understanding zodiac signs. He compares them to forces of nature, essentially. So you can see, well, he doesn't name them, or does he? Okay, so but here, fire of fire, that would be Aries. Air of fire would be Leo, and water of fire would be Sagittarius. So you can see what he's comparing them to. Aries is like lightning, Leo is like the sun, and Sagittarius like a rainbow. That's way off subject, though. I couldn't find the Chinese universe. I think that's what it was called. But that's fine. Chinese cosmos. This Chinese arrangement, sorry, let me find my place. This Chinese arrangement, bring it back to size. This Chinese arrangement is thus tenfold and has been shown to be admirably equivalent to the system which has been here examined. He's talking about the Kabbalah. Six, the ancient scheme of the elements, planets, and zodiacal signs was summarized by the Kabbalists in their Tree of Life. This identity between the two systems was masked until quite recently, there's a note, by the fact that the Chinese continued with their doubling up system and so turned their 8 trigrams into 64 hexagrams, while the scholars of Western Asia joined together their 10 numbers on the Tree of Life by 22 paths. Let's just find what that note is before we go on. Well, I can't find it. Oh, here it is. The present author discovered this fact during his study still incomplete. Sorry. The present author discovered this fact during his study, still incomplete, of the Yi King, or Yi Ching. The Chinese have thus 64 principal symbols as against the 32 of the tree, but the Kabbalists have a concatenation of symbols which is capable of very subtle interpretation and handling. It is also better fitted to describe the internal relations of its elements. Moreover, each can be multiplied or subdivided at will, as convenience may require. Okay. The Tree of Life. 1. This figure must be studied very carefully, for it is the basis of the whole system on which the tarot is based. It is quite impossible to give a complete explanation of this figure, because, for one thing, it is quite universal. Therefore, it cannot mean the same to any one person as to any other. A's universe is not B's universe, and if A and B are sitting opposite each other at table, A sees the right side of the lobster and B the left. That's funny. Excuse me. If they stand side by side and look at a star, the angle is different. Although this difference is infinitesimal, it exists. But the tarot is the same for all in the same way in which any scientific fact or formula is the same for all. It is most important to remember that the facts of science, though universally true in the abstract, are still not precisely true for any one observer, because even if the observation of any common object is made by two people of identical sensory reactions from the same spot, it cannot be done directly at the same time, and even the smallest fraction of a second is sufficient to move both object and observer in space. You get what he's saying, and he's kind of repeating something that, or reiterating something that he said earlier. This fact is to be emphasized. Well, you are doing it. Because one must not take the Tree of Life as a dead, fixed formula. It is, in a sense, an eternal pattern of the universe, just because it is infinitely elastic, and it is to be used as an instrument in one's researches into nature and her forces. It is not to be made an excuse for dogmatism. The tarot should be learned as early in life as possible. A fulcrum for memory and a schema for mind. It should be studied constantly, a daily exercise, for it is universally elastic and grows in proportion to the use intelligently made of it. Thus, it becomes a most ingenious and excellent method of appreciating the whole of existence. I can agree with that. And I can agree that the tarot is a good tool for studying that Tree of Life. Though it's possible that the tarot has nothing to do with, or the creators of the deck really had no intention of syncretizing it with Kabbalah. But what Crowley's done here with his syncretism is so good that if you want to use the tarot as a tool for studying Kabbalah, he's made it 100% doable. He could also have merit in his idea that it was intended to be that way. 2. It seems probable that the Kabbalists who invented the Tree of Life were inspired by Pythagoras, or that both he and they derived their knowledge from a common source in higher antiquity. In any case, both schools agree upon one fundamental postulate, which is as follows. Ultimate reality is best described by numbers and their interplay. It is interesting to note that modern mathematical physics has been finally driven to some similar assumption. Further, the attempt to describe reality by a single definite theorem, I'm going to say that's theorem, has been abandoned. Modern thought conceives reality under the image of a ring of 10 ideas, such as potential, matter, and so on. Each term has no meaning in itself. It can only be understood in terms of the others. This is exactly the conclusion which appears earlier in this essay, with regard to the way in which the planets, elements, and signs were all dependent on each other and composed of each other. But the further attempt to reach reality led the Kabbalists to sum up the qualities of these rather vague and literary ideas by referring them all to the numbers of the decimal scale. Numbers, then, are the nearest approach to reality, which is shown in this system. The number 4, for instance, is not so specially the result of adding 1 to 3, or squaring 2, or having 8. It is a thing in itself, with all sorts of moral, sensible, and intellectual qualities. It symbolizes such ideas as law, restraint, power, protection, and stability. In the Kabbalistic system, the original idea is 0. There's a note there, which appears under 3 forms. Rather, as in Chinese philosophy, the Tao becomes manifested little by little through the Te, or, as in the best of the Hindu systems, the god of destruction and annihilation, Shiva, becomes manifested through the infinite energy, Sakti. That is a long sentence. But there was a note there. In the Kabbalistic system, the original idea is 0. Let's just find where we can get a note on that. 1. It is intentional to repeat here in other language the ideas explained already in this essay. Is that what is being referred to here? Is that note for that part? Okay. The system begins, therefore, with nothing, Sof, without limit, and Sof, or the limitless light. That's what he spoke about, the 3 veils of negativity, or the negative, the 3 veils that come before any positive manifestation. He was talking about how there's nothingness, without limit or limitlessness, and limitless light. One may now proceed to imagine at any point in this light, again, the light or the limitless light is kind of like we would imagine like an ether counter space, essentially, a field upon which the energy that is the universe moves, the magnetism and dielectricity forces that create everything. Anyway, I don't want to ramble too much. Limitless light. One may now proceed to imagine any point in this light to select it for observation. The fact of doing so makes it positive. This gives the number 1, which is called Kether, the crown. Other systems arise by reason of the necessity of thought, as explained in the following table. So here we are returning to this concept of the Naples arrangement, but now he's kind of laying it out in a table. making it a little more clear. But this is something we discussed. I think video 2 had the first discussion of the Naples arrangement. But here we go. Okay, so it starts a little confusing because we start with the 3 veils of negative space. But he defines the first one as 61 equals 0. That I can't really explain to you or tell you why 61. Now this is something we could probably learn more about through his other books like Gematria or probably Gematria. Okay. Next, 61 plus 146 equals 0 as undefined or space. Then 61 plus 146 plus 207 equals 0 as basis of possible vibration. So essentially there's where we reach our field of ether. I like to use that term because that we can imagine that anything manifested is kind of a perturbation, disturbance in that field of ether, like something that would cause a wave, a ripple. And those waves are what cause life, essentially. Waves of ether. So that's the basis of possible vibration that I was referring to. Then we move on to 1. So from 0, from the 3 veils of negative, we get 1. The point, positive yet indefinable. Then 2, which is the point distinguishable from one other. Then 3, the point defined by relation to 2 others, the abyss between ideal and actual. Now, the full explanation for all this, again, was in video 2, I believe, in the earlier section called the Naples arrangement. Probably happens probably further into the video. 4, the point defined by 3 coordinates, or matter. 5, motion, or time. Hey, the womb. For only through motion and in time can events occur. 6, the point, now self-conscious, because able to define itself in terms of the above. 7, the point's idea of bliss, or ananda. 8, the point's idea of thought, or cheat. 9, the point's idea of being, or sat. And 10, the point's idea of itself fulfilled in its complement, as determined by 7, 8, and 9. Now, yeah, this was all explained earlier. I should not repeat myself so much. It will be seen, let's go up, just in case when people want to kind of look over that for a bit longer. It will be seen from the above that by means of these 10 positive numbers, but not by any lesser number, can one arrive at a positive description of any given object or idea. Bold claim. So far, the argument has been erected on a rigid mathematical basis, with only the slightest tincture of philosophy to give it form. But it is at this point that for the purpose of describing the objects, thought, and sense, one is compelled to join hands with the trologers. Perhaps they meant astrologers. The problem now is to assign to pure number the moral as which go with it. This is partly a matter of experience, partly tradition derived from older experience. It would be unwise to discard tradition with complete contempt, because all thinking is bound by the laws of the mind itself, and the mind has been formed through thousands of years of evolution in each man by the thoughts of his ancestors. The cells of all living brains are just as much the children of the great thinkers of the past as the development of the organs and limbs. Very interesting. There are very few people today who have heard of Plato and Aristotle. Not 1 in 1,000, perhaps 10,000 of those have ever read either of them, even in translations. But there are also very few people whose thinking, such as it is not conditioned by the ideas of those two men. In the Tree of Life, therefore, is found the first attempt to concoct the ideal with, or to conct. Interesting word I've never seen before. The ideal with the actual. The Kabbalists say, for example, that the number 7 contains the idea of Venus, and the number 8 that of Mercury, that the connecting path between 1 and 6 refers to the moon, and that between 3 and 6 the sign of Gemini. Now let's pull up that tree again, just so I can show you. And this isn't the same tree that I used in the last video, and I don't think the paths are assigned to the letters how Crowley would want them. This is a different system, but this will do. And just so, because there are no numbers here, maybe I should have chosen a better tree. But this is, I'll show you. This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Okay? Simple enough. So, Kabbalists say, for example, that the number 7 contains the idea of Venus. Again, 7, we describe it briefly as bliss. And 8, or thought, that of Mercury. That the connecting path between 1 and 6 refers to the moon. 1, 6, so the path here in between refers to the moon. Okay. And that between 3 and 6, the sign of Gemini. So this is something we've already discussed, all these things actually. So 3 and 6, here's the path between, that's to the sign of Gemini, but we were talking about it in terms of the card, the Lovers, which he attributes to Gemini. Good, very good. Then, what is the true meaning in the category of the real of these planets and signs? Here again, one is faced with the impossibility exact definition because the possibilities of research are infinite. Also, at any moment in any research, the one idea merges into the other and clouds the exact definition of the images. But this, of course, is the objective. There's a lot of typos. These are all blind steps on the way to the real light, when the universe is perceived as one, yet with all its... That's unfortunate. I can't even make that one out, that typo. Yet with all its something, each necessary and each distinct. With all its lights, each necessary and each distinct? I believe so. Let's read that sentence again. These are all blind steps on the way to the real light, when the universe is perceived as one, yet with all its lights, each necessary and each distinct. With all its parts. With all its parts. Yeah. When the universe is perceived as one, yet with all its parts, each necessary and each distinct. The beginning of this work is, however, easy enough. One requires no more than elementary classical knowledge. Roughly taking, for a start, the natures of the planets are described by those of the gods after whom the actual bodies in heaven were named. So we need a little bit of foreknowledge. According to the old astrological ideas of their influence on the affairs of men. The same is true, to a less extent, of the signs of the zodiac. There's not so much information available about their natures, but it is helpful to note which planet rules which sign, and in which sign which planets are exalted. The individual fixed stars do not enter into the system of the tarot. Okay. Tarot and the Tree of Life. It's about 40 minutes in. I think we can save this section, Tarot and the Tree of Life, which honestly sounds familiar as if I've read it already. But no. We're almost there, guys. Getting through part 1. I really don't see any need to keep going into section 2 or part 2. We have a little bit to go. But here, part 2, or where he actually starts talking about the individual cards. There's a lot to say about the Fool. There's a lot to say about a lot of these. No guarantees. But since we're over 40 minutes, I will say that this next section can be saved. Let me just stop there so that when I sit down next time, we'll have it in the right spot. The Tarot and the Tree of Life. So thanks for watching this time. Thanks for sitting through another 40 plus minutes of me reading like a fool. No pun intended. Thanks.